like a long range.
Sorry, on YouTube. What's it called?
It has the URL.
It's called CCU Masters of Music Technology Capstone. I'm going to stop talking. It's live.
That's a good sign. Cool. We'll go ahead and shut our cameras down and mute until we're ready to go. But All right. Hello, everybody. I see a McKinley Devilbiss with us. Thank you. Thank you, McKinley, for the acknowledgement. I see an Evie Palmisano. And last but not least, Kyle Strain. Thank you so much. Excellent. Cool. We'll give it about 30 more seconds here, but thank you all for being here. I'm excited to have the world get a chance to hear and see what you all have been working on this past semester and what has truly been the culmination of a lot of work that you've put in over these past 2 years. So this is going to be a blast. As we go through the presentations today, please make sure that if you have any questions that you utilize both Facebook or YouTube. I should be getting those questions, and I'll be passing along those questions to the students here at the end of each of their 20-minute presentations. Yeah, I think we should get started. So my name is Tim Fischer. I'm one of the instructors for the Masters in Arts of Music Technology program here at Coastal Carolina University. This is our second graduating class of students for this program, and what a great graduating class they are. They've worked really, really hard for the past 2 years, and in fact, have been given, as many students have over the past year, quite a tough hand to work with. Almost 3 of the 4 semesters of this 2-year program have been with the students in some type of streaming capacity due to COVID restrictions, and they've worked really, really hard and overcome, I think, a lot of the inherent challenges that has posed to do a fantastic job and put these great capstone presentations together. You're going to hear them each talk about how they handled that with their projects here. But we have, again, McKinley Devilbiss, Evie Palmisano, and Kyle Strain here with us today. And they'll each will be talking, again, 20 minutes about their capstone projects and having 10 minutes at the end of each of those blocks to answer some questions. Before we begin, just to talk a little bit about the program. The program is a 2-year program, and students learn recording, mixing, mastering, composition for media, acoustic principles, production techniques. They learn the ability to build and repair their own equipment, both instruments and audio recording equipment, and learn a bit about electronic music production and synthesis techniques. So what you're going to see today is how they used all of their classes in those areas to put together projects in music and recording that I think that any of them should be really proud of. I know I'm proud of the work that they put in. So all that said, let's start with McKinley Devilbiss, our first presentation. So just to give you a little background on McKinley. McKinley grew up in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. He studied music performance on bass guitar at Coastal Carolina University, and he works locally as a freelance musician and audio engineer. His capstone project demonstrates his ability to produce, record, mix, and master original songs from the local Myrtle Beach music scene, specifically working with 4 different artists. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and stop the sharing, and I'm going to let McKinley take it away.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Fischer. Okay. Right. Got to share sounds. Okay. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So yeah, I'm McKinley Devilbiss, and for my projects, I did what I'm calling the Make Your Mark Audio Artist Spotlight. So Make Your Mark Audio is kind of the working title for my work as an audio engineer, a business that I hope to keep going after graduation to build into a career. And I chose to take 4 bands that are local to Myrtle Beach and record an original song with each band to showcase local original talent here in the area. Being a tourist town, we tend to hear a lot of cover bands and stuff like that out at bars, which is all good and well. I play in a lot of those bands. But there's also a lot of talent that writes original music that kind of gets glossed over. So I wanted to kind of focus in on that. I'll be releasing the songs as a compilation showcasing original music in Myrtle Beach. And I'll also be using the songs as portfolio material to promote my work as an audio engineer. So the artists involved are the Family Function, which is an instrumental funk rock band. We write a lot of kind of different stuff. I do play bass in that band. And so we put together something for this project. We also included Brian Roessler, who is actually CCU faculty in the English department. And he has been a longtime supporter of local original music here at the beach. And I couldn't imagine doing this project without him, because for as long as I've been around playing music, he's been there supporting. So I was happy to have him involved. He's kind of a singer-songwriter, acoustic, alternative rock mix. Sweet Sweet is a local duo of indie folk Americana music, consists of a cello and a guitar, and they both sing. A great band, one of my favorite acts around here. The Craig Sorrells Project is another band that I have the fortune of being an on-call bass player for. They play like a lot of funk and soul music and rock, and they put together their first original for this project. So we'll be debuting a bit of that today. So for the recording process, each band had a very different way of approaching how we were going to do this. Basically, you know, you're working with people like, okay, we have so many different styles of music, so that's one consideration, different schedules and all that. And also, of course, COVID-19. So that posed a lot of problems as far as spacing issues, having people in the same room too close together. We had to watch out for that, keeping everyone safe. And we also had to quarantine the equipment that we used at CCU studio for 3 days after usage to keep any germs from spreading. So to deal with this, we actually decided to record certain things at different locations, which had its own challenges. So because of that, I had to be proficient in 3 different DAWs, digital audio workstations. Pro Tools is what we use at the school. Logic is what I use at home. I'm most familiar with that one. And Studio One is another one that I had to use at a friend of mine's studio. I had to lug equipment from from the studio to different spaces to make sure these sessions went the way I had planned them in my head. And in post-production, some of the songs we would record some elements at the studio and some elements at my house. So I had to make sure that they sounded like they were kind of recorded in the same space. So that was an interesting challenge as well. So to start off, the Family Function. So this is a 5-piece band, and we recorded a 3-song suite live in the studio. So it was one performance all the way through. The songs run back to back into each other. And to set up for the session, I had to take about 6 hours to plan the session, make sure everything was routed right, hook everything up before the band came in. And because of COVID-19 spacing rules at Coastal, I had to do a very unorthodox setup and have everyone spaced out in different rooms. Some people are out in the hallway. Amps were set up on ISO rooms across the hall, and we'll see a video of how that looks in a second. But yeah, so we took the time to do enough takes to get comfortable with a whole live take. Because of the spacing, we had enough distance between mic sources that we had a lot of sound isolation. So any little mistakes that we may have made was very easy to deal with because there wasn't drums bleeding into the guitar or bass and vice versa. So once we got done with all that, we set up a second session to do some horn overdubs and punches. Punches meaning we're fixing little mistakes that came in before. And we added some ambient effects, just like some background air. And you notice it's called the Dirty Sock Suite. We have like a washing machine in the background and part of the song, just to kind of add some flavor to the music. So that was a little snippet of the second movement of the 3-song suite. We'll be hearing the rest of that soon. Here's a video showing the setup that we had to do to make this safe for everyone. on them, same distance apart from the speaker cons. I am. Guitar out here. Soft backward again. All that's coming in. This, got the amp in here, isolated. 2 mics, 609, 57. Those come from the wall box.
3, 4.
So it was probably hard to hear what I was saying. I was in a mask, but you could see that the setup was very. Okay. So this is just a photo of what we call input sheets. So it's just a way for us to keep track of what instrument is going, is using what microphone, going to what preamp, and going to what interface or what channel on the interface in Pro Tools. As you can see, there's a lot of scratches and things I had to change as we figured out certain things I planned weren't working. We had to make some adjustments for that. And to keep communication friendly, we had talkback mics for each of the members that were not in the same room with each other. Here's a picture of the overdub session for horns we did later. This is our good friend Kyle Strain, who will be presenting later, laying down some saxophone for us. And as you can see, I have 2 mics here. One is a AEA R92 ribbon mic, and this one is AKG C414 condenser microphone. The condenser is a little more bright and forward. The ribbon microphone is more smooth and mellow sounding. And it kind of gives me a few different flavors to choose from depending on the song or the blend that I need for mixing it into the band. So next we did Sweet Sweet, a song called The Optimist, which is a very mellow and introspective kind of song. So when I was discussing this with Jeremy, the lead singer, he said he would like it to be kind of a roomy, open sound. So we decided to try something and record it in the Edwards Recital Hall, which is meant for kind of vocalists. It's a very live room. So I brought the mobile rig from CCU studio over and set up a bunch of mics in the room to capture the natural ambience of the hall. So we started with guitar, then laid down the cello afterwards, then the vocals, then came back and did piano with Stevie Martinez, which is a good friend of theirs. He's also a teacher at Coastal as well, teaching bass. Now this yielded really awesome results, but it also came with its problems. Because the room is so live, any noise that we didn't want was also amplified almost to the same level of the stuff I was trying to record, because it's a rather quiet song. So things like air conditioning, piano bench squeaking, parts of the piano actually squeaking. Sometimes I could hear people walking down the hallway and shutting a door down the hallway would kind of creep into the recording. So I had my work cut out for me trying to make that work. Luckily, I've been doing work with the Athenaeum Press, doing audio restoration and using Isotope RX. That's a software that you can remove like stuff that you don't want from your audio. So we'll take a listen to this song real quick, and then I'll give you an example of what Isotope RX is. So that's a blend of close mics and mics out in the room, capturing the natural sound of the room. This is Isotope RX. This is actually me working on the piano track. These little highlighted areas right here are where the foot pedal created like a thump in the noise, a doom doom. And I had to basically, it's almost like Photoshop. You kind of highlight it and use different tools to bring the volume of the unwanted noise back or get rid of it in other ways. So that was very helpful in making this track work. Here's a photo of us set up in the hall. Jeremy singing into AEA R92, the same mic that we saw on the saxophone earlier. Have two C414s and an NOS pattern here, capturing the sound of the room. And this is when we did the piano. I've set up two KM184s and an XY pattern here. Those are small diaphragm condensers, and that pattern sets or captures a good stereo image. And because the capsules are so close, it minimizes phase issues, which means the sound basically hits the microphone at the same time. Okay, so for Brian Roessler, basically he is normally a singer-songwriter. He plays around town a lot, performing solo with his acoustic. And so that's how we started the recording. He came in and laid an acoustic guitar track down and a vocal, and then trusted me to add to it to make it into more of a 90s rock kind of thing, like an alternative rock thing is what we're going for. He's into the Counting Crows, so that was a big reference that I used to make decisions. So I ended up laying down bass guitar, a bunch of different electric guitar tracks, some organ sounds, some piano sounds, some background vocals. And then I sent it to my buddy, Brian Daggett, who's a drummer, to lay down the drum tracks. Here's an example of a chorus from that song.
There are days when I can stay out of my mind. There are days when I can say I'm doing fine. But no matter what, I never seem to find the ability to shine. The ability to shine.
Yeah. So I basically did all that without him knowing and sent it back to him. And then, we made some tweaks and stuff once he got to hear the song. So for the Craig Sorrells project, Craig initially sent me a demo of MIDI files and EWI tracks. He plays what's called an electric wind instrument, so we can get different sounds out of that. Basically as a roadmap of how he thought the song might go. So once we had that, we set up in my buddy Brian's studio. This is the same drummer who laid down the track for Brian Roessler, and just replaced the instruments one by one. Brian uses Studio One in his studio, so I had to adapt a little bit to a different workflow, which was interesting, but we got it done. So yeah, we started with the drums, and then I laid down some bass, add the guitars, keyboard, vocals, and all that. In each step, Craig let everyone have their own little flavor added to the song. So it was interesting to see how each musician would add to the song and change things a little bit and inspire the next player to write more interesting parts. Yeah, the song really took shape as we continued adding parts, and the lyrics were written after the band recorded their parts. So I'm going to use this song as an example to go through kind of the mixing process to mastering. Here's a few photos of us set up at Brian's house. The left is the control room. Then he has his drum set up in his live room. This is the drummer Josh doing some background vocals. We have a Warm Audio 87 mic there that sounded really good. For the overheads of the drums, we have some TC30 Earthworks, which are really crisp, bright sounding overheads. They sounded really good. So once we had all the songs tracked, time to mix it. I mix everything in Logic Pro X, which is my preferred DAW. You'll notice in this picture, this is my room that I'm in now. So this is where I do all my mixing. You notice these black rectangles, they're sound panels that I built. So we took an acoustic class last semester, which focused on how to deal with room modes and reflections and the problems of existing in a small room. And that really helped me to learn how to optimize my mix position, meaning when I sit here, I have pretty much my equipment as flat as I can make it be, so I'm not getting a false representation of what the music is. So when I take it out to the real world, my car, earbuds, whatever, it translates really well. On top of that, I talk to each band about references, about what they want stuff to sound like. So they will give me examples of songs, and I would take that and put it into the session to reference when I'm mixing. Here's a list of notable plugins that I use. Just different EQs, saturators, and some analog emulations that make, if you're recording in a digital world, or in this case, I'm mixing all in the box. It really helps kind of things pop and come to life. So for this song, the end goal is to have a high energy modern sound that was loud but dynamic, which means I want it to be loud enough to compete commercially with other songs, but also still retain punch and a difference in the quieter parts versus the loud parts. So I'll give you an example of the mix that I did for the Craig Sorrells project. This is the song Unshackled. Well, so some challenges I had that I'll point out before I play that. We tracked a lot of different tracks. So the guitars, we had 3 mics on a guitar cab, and we did probably like 5 or 6 different parts. So that starts to add up a lot. So track management, keeping everything organized was a big part of this. The trumpets were part of the original demo that Craig sent me. They were mixed in a way that was very reverberant and distant sounding. And we liked the sound when we started tracking other elements with it. But when I started mixing it, it started to fall behind in the band. So it took some creative editing to get it to pop again. And lastly, it's a dance arrangement. There's a lot of instruments happening at once. So it was interesting to figure out how to make everything sit well and sound like they belonged. So here's an example. I stopped earlier for some reason, but so you'll notice the trumpet sound. Here's the my clever way of working with that. So on the right here, we have what's called a transient designer, and you can kind of highlight the initial peaks, loud, like attack part of certain sounds, and turn those up in respect to the sustain, which is the tone that lasts afterwards. So that kind of helps things feel more forward. On the left, this is a saturation plugin. It adds more density to the sound, which helped it come out front. There's also a dynamics knob here, which also acts somewhat similarly to the transient designer. So those two things together, I was able to bring the horns more up front. So for mastering, normally in a master, you would take a body of works from a single artist and make them mesh together. In this case, I'm working with 4 different artists, and we're going to release them as singles for 4 different artists. I'm going to put a playlist together for later. So I wasn't so much worried about them existing on a CD together necessarily, but I did want to have them kind of exist on their own, have the right vibe for the track themselves, but I did master them in the same session so that I could compare and contrast to make sure it wasn't wildly off. So yeah, the end goal here is streaming. So loudness is usually normalized by the streaming platform already. So if you go on Spotify, they're going to turn your tracks up or down, regardless of what level you have them. So I didn't have to worry so much about that. It was more of a subjective decision per song of how loud I wanted them to be and how dynamic I wanted them to be. And here's an example of this song mastered. Yeah, so you'll notice how that was a little more forward, a little bit louder, a little heavier hitting, and mastering was what got me to get the song there. So for the release of these 4 songs, I'm going to have each of the bands release their songs as singles on Spotify or however they choose to release them. And I'm going to take each platform, Spotify, YouTube, Apple Music, and make playlists to advertise the Make Your Mark audio spotlight. The reason for this is that I wanted the bands to keep their songs, make the money off their streaming without me having to be the middleman. it was just easier to do that, and I can compile it as a playlist to advertise things later. I'll also be reaching out to local press to advertise the release, as well as promote the music on social media. And I want to give a special thanks to, of course, all the artists that are involved in this project. So they were all super, super awesome to work with, very inspiring, very encouraging. Thanks to the classmates, we bounced a lot of ideas off of each other, and they were super helpful as well. Thanks to my professors, Dr. Fischer, Dr. White, all the other professors that are involved in the program. They helped us learn and grow so much. And last but certainly not least, thanks to my wife for being so patient with me while I had to work on all this stuff. Okay.
Awesome. Great, Mac. The tracks are sounding awesome. Every time I hear them, I feel like they keep getting better and better. And we're at the final stages here, so they're doing all the things they're supposed to do. So as I mentioned before, if you have questions for McKinley, please take a minute and go ahead and put your questions here in the chat. The first one here, I have to imagine, is a little bit of a joke, but I might be wrong. The question is from Dr. Philip Powell. Is there any flumpet on this release?
I know exactly what that means. That is no, there's not flumpet. So our friend JP Taylor, we were in the band that got to go to Europe back in my undergrad at Coastal, and he would play, how did that go? I think he mixed a trumpet and a flute together somehow and made that one weird instrument.
You just jam the flute into the bell of the trumpet, I think is how that works. Yeah, it's pretty easy.
What he did, but yeah, we call it the flumpet.
Well, maybe you can talk a little bit about recording the horn parts on that first track, the Family Function one. I know when we were listening to different takes, it felt like it was difficult to get them to blend together. What was your approach for getting a cohesive sound out of 3 different horn parts that were recorded all at different times?
Right. So we recorded flute, trumpet, and saxophone. And the 2 parts, so 3-part suite, horns existed in part 2 and part 3, and they both required different sounds. So it helped to have those multiple mic options to choose different ways that the horns would blend. Automation was a big part of that. So for each line, depending on how the people played, I would balance out note for note the levels of each note to make sure all of a sudden the flute wasn't louder than the last take. And then a blend of EQ and reverb to make it sound like they're sitting in a room together and existing in the same space.
When you talk about automating the different notes, is that something that would typically happen if we had the whole horn section in one space recording them, or was that a result of how the recording was laid out in this situation?
I definitely think it was a result of how we recorded it. Typically, horn players know how to mix together with other horn players. You're trained to do that kind of thing. So if we had recorded all in the same space at the same time, the other horn players could hear everyone else and make adjustments in real time to better blend together. So the way we did it is we started with, I believe, saxophone, and then worked our way up from there, trumpet, then flute. So although you can still hear each other, it's different when one person's adjusting to a track versus all 3 people adjusting to each other all at the same time.
Yeah, in general, I guess, I mean, you mentioned this at the beginning, talking about working with the COVID-19 restrictions and how that manifested itself in different recording sessions and different sound isolation and stuff. Is there a way that you might be able to summarize, before starting this project, did you have any idea that those would be like such a difficult task or like difficult challenge to overcome? Or was it really easy to overcome it? What's your take on just kind of you're finished this, the album's mastered, the EP's mastered, the playlist is mastered, whatever. And what are you taking away from this process related to that setup?
Right. I wouldn't call it harder than I expected. It was just a lesson in having to constantly adapt to new situations without getting frustrated. And then just trying to think of all the different things and having conversations with people. I think communication was a big key here. Letting the band know, hey, we're going to do this at a studio, but you guys are going to be in different rooms. You won't be able to see each other. How does everyone feel? Is everyone comfortable? What are the things that we have to do to make this comfortable for everyone? So that was a big part of it. And I think the biggest hurdle I had to come over within this project was kind of scheduling at 4 different bands and dealing with like, oh, this person was exposed, or there was a point where I thought I was exposed to COVID. I ended up testing negative, but had to cancel a bunch of sessions and reschedule. So those are definitely challenges, but careful planning helped us still reach the end goal.
Awesome. Well, clearly you did. And again, everything sounds great. Dr. White's saying that this would be a difficult undertaking under normal circumstances, but doing this safely with this many different groups is incredibly impressive. So that's a kudo towards for you. And Professor Bailey is saying, what barking dog plugin are you using? I have to imagine that is my dog. And the key there is to just make sure that your neighbors come home when you're live streaming Capstone project, and the dog will take care of it itself. Yeah, that's a little inside tip for me, though. Anything else that you'd like to maybe just kind of summarize or talk about that you haven't had a chance to on this one?
Well, I think we pretty much covered everything. I think working with good musicians who are also good people is a really good recipe to have a great product. And I got the opportunity to do that, so I'm very thankful.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, how can we hear the finished result? Is there a date that you have for the release, or is there what is your plan? I know you talked about putting together a playlist. If we want to follow you and hear these final tracks.
Right. There's not a specific date for the release yet because I have to coordinate with 4 different bands and make sure we do this right. So that will be what we start working on immediately after this. But if you follow my Facebook page, McKinley Devilbiss, I'm also on Instagram, McKinley Dev Music. You will definitely see it if you follow me there.
Awesome. Well, I'll be keeping an eye out. Cool. Well, excellent. Nice job, McKinley. Thank you so much. Great. Well, let's go on to our second presentation here. We are going to have Evie Palmisano take over. So if I can give a little short intro on Evie. Evie lives in Charleston, South Carolina. She studied arts management at the College of Charleston and graduated at the top of her class in 2016. She is the assistant technical director and head of audio at the College of Charleston's Sotile Theater, where she has worked since 2015. Evie engineered, produced, mixed, and mastered the debut EP, Hey Richard, for Charlotte-based all-female punk band Richard. So Evie, take it away.
Okay, thank you. Hi. All right, let me get this screen shared. Okay. Okay. All right, can you see this?
Yes.
Great, awesome. Okay. All right, so so my capstone project was to work with Richard to come up with an EP. We decided we want to do a full EP, and we kind of got ambitious and decided we were going to try to do 5 songs, and they were all original and unreleased. So to give you some context for the whole project, as Dr. Fischer said, I got my BA in arts management from CFC. I did not have any music experience really. I actually kind of got thrown into working audio in 2017 when we suddenly didn't have anybody who could run the soundboard, or we were soon to not have somebody running our soundboard. So they asked me if I was interested in learning, since I'd been there the longest out of all the other stagehands that were there still. And I said yes. And so I learned on the job and kind of fell in love with it. And that's how I ended up at Coastal in this program. Some cool things about my job that kind of prepared me for this project is we're a roadhouse, which means we're basically just a rental space for anybody really, so long as you can get in your foot in the door. So I've worked with all kinds of organizations and clients and patrons, and so I've got a lot of people skills in the realm of knowing how to serve a project and trying to stay out of the way while also helping move it forward. And then just knowing some basics about sound were pretty helpful. But I came with a different perspective into this program because this is more of a recording setting, and I've worked pretty exclusively in live sound. So it was a little bit of a challenge to change gears, and it was kind of intimidating at first, but what was pretty cool is Richard decided to take a chance on me. So Richard is made up of 4 women. There's Crystal, she's their bassist and vocalist and just all around front woman for the band. She's kind of the band leader. Sarah, she plays guitar and she does backup vocals and gang vocals, in addition to doing lead vocals on one track on the EP. I guess for clarification, gang vocals are, I didn't realize until I discussed this with our Capstone class, and Dr. Fischer pointed out that he didn't know necessarily what that was, or some people might not know. So it's kind of genre specific to like punk music, metal music, hardcore. It's basically just like group vocals where it's centered around like yelling or shouting together as opposed to like harmonizing or sounding, musical. So Laura is their drummer. She also did gang vocals, and she does harmonies and backing vocals as well. And then Savannah is, she plays the Behringer DeepMind 12, I believe is what it is. It's a synthesizer. So this is the EP. It's coming out, tough, pixelated soapbox, glass house, and sinking. Kind of the running themes throughout the whole project. It's punk, so of course there's political criticism, social commentary. There's a lot of content that's very personal to Crystal's life. And what it's like actually like coming out is about her story coming out and not necessarily being accepted by your loved ones and finding family elsewhere and learning to love yourself despite that. So when I actually like really became a part of this project, it was very exciting to me because a lot of these values I shared, and I was excited to like help amplify that and make it to where the rest of the world could hear it. So goals for the band, they didn't have any previous like studio level recordings. They just had demos and then like live videos of performances, which they didn't get to have very many of because they had only become like performance ready as a band right before the pandemic was declared back in March of 2020. So that was kind of like the concept of being able to actually record was really exciting. And for me, I just wanted to capture them in like a bottle and maybe do a little bit of refining and tweaks here and there, but not take away any of the essence of who they are and how they sound and what their vibe is. So to do that, there was a lot of pre-production planning. So I actually knew that I wanted to record Richard back in May of 2020 when our previous graduating class came through and did all of their capstone projects. And I was already like, I know I want to record a band because I certainly am not going to perform something. I'm not the musician. And I had started developing a relationship with Crystal because she was dating my sister and now they're engaged / sort of already married. That's another story. Anyways, so I approached her back in May of 2020 to ask her if she would be interested in letting me record them. And it was really wonderful. They all agreed because it was exciting to have somebody who was just as new at this recording process be willing to let me record them. So we got to learn together. So I met with them in January. And I drove all the way up to Charlotte to go to one of their rehearsals, and we were all masked up and socially distanced. And we talked about when everybody could record. It turned out we were only all available one weekend in March. So I knew from the start I was going to have to plan a lot ahead of time to make sure that we could fit an entire EP in one weekend. And the goal was to do 5 songs. So we got a little ambitious, but that's okay. It worked out. So I got some reference tracks from them. I got some goals, like what kind of vocals they wanted, what kind of sound they were going for. And then I started doing like technical stuff, like trying to figure out, okay, do we need to play to a click? Because that would make this recording process a lot easier. And if we do, then we need to figure out what your BPM is in the song so that you can start practicing to one. So this was how it looked at that rehearsal that I went to, that they were nice enough to let me hang out at. They rehearse in the, I think it's Rock on 22nd. It's a building that houses Girls Rock Charlotte and the Pachyderm Music Lab, which is it's run by Crystal. And so they use this space. It's very vibey. So that kind of came into play for me later. So major considerations for this project for me was knowing that we had a drummer that used to be a guitarist, and she's only been playing, I think even at this point, for like 2 years. So it was going to be intimidating to record, and being like the base of every song kind of puts you in like a little bit of you're under a magnifying glass. So we knew we wanted to practice with a click ahead of time to try to get comfortable with it, which caused some troubles later because they had to actually have a click play out loud in a rehearsal space that's all hard surfaces. So it was kind of hard to hear. So they had to play it really loud through an amp, which caused some issues later that I'll get to. For me, I kind of already mentioned it. All of my experience was in live sound. So I had to really plan out and like actually visualize what the process was going to look like for me and what I needed to do, all the steps I needed to go through and boxes I needed to check ahead of time to prepare for the session. Other things, more practical things like the technical side, recording in wheelwright. Did I want to isolate the amps or did I want to go for more of a live sound? We ended up choosing to isolate at least a little bit. We kept everybody in the same room so that you could have that vibe together. I didn't want to separate them because it was already kind of intimidating to record in an actual studio. But we pulled the amps out and put them in some of our ISO rooms. One was in Dr. Fischer's office and one was in Dr. White's office. And then I kind of had to think about whether or not we were going to use CCU's drums because I knew I could set them up ahead of time and I could have them tuned ahead of time. But I didn't want to throw Laura a curveball and give her a kit she'd never played on if that wasn't something she was going to be comfortable with. So there were a lot of considerations that went into it. And part of those considerations also included selecting mics and preamps, and our mic locker at CCU is actually pretty good, which is a bad thing when you have to narrow down what mics you're going to use. So I have a list later that I'll show in the presentation that was kind of me trying to plan through it. Really, at the end of the day, my biggest concern for this whole project was just making sure that the band felt comfortable in the space because it's a school space, it's cinder block walls and sound paneling, and it kind of feels a little sterile, which is uncomfortable for, you know, a punk band that's used to playing in a very vibey kind of space. So I came up with a plan ahead of time and I talked to the band about bringing things to make them feel comfortable in the space. And I also did that. I tried to bring some of my own things that would make me feel comfortable too. And then I also had some really great advice from Dr. Fischer that we should have everything set up so that when the band loaded in, they actually had some time to kind of just play around in the space and get comfortable in it before we had to immediately start recording because we were on a tight schedule. So the actual recording day arrives, well, sort of, leading up to the band arriving on the 5th, because we were going to record the 6th and the 7th. I spent all day Friday. I skipped one of my classes and then like kind of had my laptop playing our virtual class like during another portion of this. And the whole time I was just setting up like lights and putting posters on the walls and moving things out of the studio and moving other things in addition to actually setting up. Which I had really awesome help from both McKinley and Kyle. Thanks, guys. I know I couldn't have done it in time without their help. So one of the big problems was the day before we were to record, Crystal's amp broke because they were rehearsing with a click through her amp because it was the loudest one they had, which is really not great to play a high-pitched click through a bass amp, I don't think. So we learned that the hard way, which means I had to find her a bass amp. And we weren't going to be able to record her amp, which she loves the sound of, which was like, it was just, we had to like plan on the fly. So I had help from McKinley and Kyle, and we pulled both the drum set so that we could preset that up, and the studio's bass amp. So also troubles along the way. The drums were way out of tune because they hadn't really been used in a while. They were just sitting on the wheelwright stage, and they really needed to be tuned, which we tried to do. And thankfully, I think it was Dr. Willis came by and actually tuned them for us. So yeah, he kind of saved the day. The only thing was I did have some advice ahead of time to get moon gels just in case we needed them. So I did, thankfully. That was actually some advice I got from a guest. It was actually Phil Allen, who's one of Dr. Fischer's friends. So the toms in particular were super boomy and like had like way too much resonance. So I used some moon gels like mid recording. Unfortunately, I had to deal with that on some of the recordings later, but it helped. And one other thing that comes up later is I actually decided to go with there's arguments about whether or not it's actually a true Glyn John setup because everybody argues about how that's, correct or not. But I had a mic out in front of the kick that you can actually see right here. That was supposed to capture both the kick, but also just the general whole set sound. And then I had 2 microphones as like sort of overheads, but not in the traditional sense. I used our AKG C414s. And one was kind of like over top of the lowest tom, and then the other one was kind of over top. Well, not over top, I guess. It was like directed. You can kind of see it over here. It's pointing towards the kit this way in like a sort of like triangle. So it captures the top of the tom and then kind of catches like a bit of the cymbal and hi-hat and snare, but from further away. And then the third mic is placed directly pointed down over top of the snare. So we spent a while setting that up because they have to be like, the spacing has to be correct so that you don't have phasing issues. And it was just really stressful, but we made it through. So long story short, that night, Richard arrived. All of them got there safely Friday night, and they came in and we were able to immediately just load in, hook up, and they were able to kind of play around in the space for a couple hours, which was great. So the next morning, I guess I'll hold off on that. So these were the lists I was talking about. This one is when I was sort of trying to plan what preamps were available that were going to sound the way that give me a sound I was looking for. Like, for example, I'd asked advice about how to use the Pacifica that we have, and was told, that one's pretty clean sounding. It's not going to give you a ton of character necessarily. So I was like, okay, great. Well, I don't want to give any like tonal character to the synth. I want it to be as true to how Savannah like created those sounds. So those kind of examples of how I went through. And then obviously like our API preamp is made for drums. You're supposed to use it with drums. That's what it's like sounds best for. So I put those on the drums and then kind of had to figure out what the heck else I was going to use for the other spot mics that I had on the drums. So anyways, I had a beautiful plan. And then when it actually came time to route everything and patch everything up in the patch bay, it kind of changed a little bit. And then I realized like, oh, right, I have to have a talkback mic. I have to have a stereo signal for this. So how am I going to do that? So there was a lot of planning that got thrown out the window, and I kind of had to just think on my feet, which is I'm sort of used to doing at work, so it wasn't too bad, but it was pretty stressful. So recording day starts, we get there at like 9 a.m. and we decide that we're going to just work on just instrumentals. And I set up a scratch vocal mic for Crystal, and we started playing through them. And I didn't really know how I wanted to go about like the setup of recording, because I didn't know how it was going to go once they were actually in the space. So the way that our sessions worked is we pretty much just played through the entire song until we had what we thought was an overall pretty good take. They'd come back into, I would go into the live room and we'd like sit and listen to it on the headphone cues, or they would come stand in the studio and I would, in the control booth, and I would play it on the actual speaker so they could hear it directly. And once we had an overall kind of good take, I would take notes on what we thought about, this is me labeling like the clip, like the track clip numbers. And instead of like renaming them, I just went by what Pro Tools called them, and made notes about what was either off or if it was a good take or whatever. So like you can see for this one, I thought it was a great take. And I was like, well, once we listen back, I was like, well, we need to punch in a spot on the synth, the kick, and the guitar. So if those are the changes we would need to make, we ended up going through and decided to just re-record the whole thing. So that was kind of the process. And then while we went through it, you can also see on the previous song that we'd worked on, I made notes about, okay, well, they're already saying like, well, I like that take, but I think we're going to need to, do this to the bass because it sounds a little funny in this frequency. So I was like, okay, all right, go ahead and start making mixing notes while we're recording. We actually ended up getting through all 5 songs somehow in one day, but we were in the studio for like 12 hours. And that was with breaks. We took like an hour, 2 hour long, like dinner break, I want to say. No, it was a lunch break. It was a late lunch. And as like I guess more of like a producer hat was on and was like, okay, well, maybe somebody's getting frustrated. The click is really frustrating right here. We had some issues with Glass House actually, where we kept trying to get that last like 15 seconds of the song with the click. And eventually, like I have it in my notes, I wrote just like, if you can't play it with the click, then fuck it. Excuse me. So we just threw out the click and we were like, all right, we're just going to play this last 15 seconds. I will mute the click once you actually get to that part. So we did like some pre-roll so that they got to get into the groove first. And then I erased the click and just muted it. And they just vibed out the last 15 seconds and it turned out fine. But I had to kind of be like, okay, it's okay. We can be flexible. And that kind of went with like, when people started to act a little tired, or if I was starting to feel frustrated with something or somebody's comment, I was like, that shouldn't make me feel irritated. I need to take a break. So, we were able to get through all 5 songs and nobody wanted to kill anyone, which was awesome. But the next day when we came in at like 11 or something, everybody kind of felt a little bit hungover in a sense, which is not surprising. I think I was naive enough to think it was going to be fine and we were going to be able to get through this weekend without too much trouble. But it kind of, and if going back, like knowing what I know now, how it went, I probably would have tried to plan things differently, but it ended up working out. And I kind of think the naivete worked in our favor because otherwise we could have been anticipating this to happen and we didn't. So we just rolled with it. The other thing that kind of came up that amused me was on the Sunday when we recorded, we were focusing on vocals and any last minute punches, which we didn't really have to do that many. I think we had a couple things for Pixelated, but I haven't had much experience I haven't had much experience recording before this, but I hadn't worked with vocalists very often, even at my job. Like we don't have many people who are in a band setting playing live at the Satilli. So I'm kind of not there for their like vocal warm-ups and what the process is for a vocalist having to like get in the right headspace. So it was actually really cool to experience that with Crystal in particular. We had some jokes because she did her vocal warm-ups and then she was like, I can't talk after I warm up. So we're going to have to come up with a system for us to communicate where I cannot talk to you. So there was a lot of texting. When we were sitting down listening back to her takes, we passed notes. I have a couple of those included. And then at one point, in order for me to communicate with her while she was in our like makeshift vocal booth, I had to send somebody else in there with her to basically just be like, okay, does she want this or this? Do you want me to turn it up? Does it sound good in your ears? How did you feel about that one? So that she could just nod or text on a screen to them and they could then talk into her mic to tell me what she'd said. So it was fun, but it was also a bit of an experience for me that I just hadn't had yet. So here's, here, go back this way. Okay, so here is the band in the space. So we ended up putting the drums over by the ISO booths in the actual studio. And had everybody in the space here. Crystal was playing her bass here, and Sarah was set up with guitar here, and Savannah was over here on her synth. And you can kind of see like over here in the window where they brought stuff of their own to kind of decorate the space. So this one just cracked me up. Like the first note that Crystal gave me on one of the tracks that we were recording for her vocals was that I just sound country AF. It just was the best. It made all of us laugh. But you know, it's really uncomfortable hearing your voice, just your voice, super up close, when you're not used to that. So it was interesting, but I'm really happy with the takes that we had. So kind of just a continuation. The next day, all of us had to go back to work because we all have lives. And it just amused me that everybody was like, I feel hungover, because doing a project like this and recording this much material that's personal, that takes a lot of concentration, is exhausting. So a huge shout out, Richard, you guys rock. All right, so then it was up to me to get us to the next process. So to start off, I just needed to get like the tracks cleaned up and make sure that everything was the final take. I actually had some incidents where I had the wrong bass track in place and didn't realize it until I sent a mix out to Crystal, and she was like, I can barely hear my bass in this one part. And I went back and listened and was like, oh my gosh, it's because it's basically like you're not playing it there. So I had to do a lot of clip gain adjustments. So like cutting the actual clip of audio and fading it down or up to adjust it within like the overall mix. And that took a good amount of time. And then I decided I wanted to remove at least some of like the breathiness from the vocals. Because when it takes place in like the silences, it's distracting from the rest of the music. And the way that they wanted this mixed was with everything kind of really close. So like the vocals aren't going to soar over the mix the way that they do in pop music. So in order for everything to kind of fit, it was like I had to carve out as much as possible to make room for the other instruments involved. So and then one thing that like you're always told is you can always remove mics later or just not use a track that you've recorded, but you can't get it back if you don't do it in the first place. So I had we used two different microphones. I used our Telefunken AK-47 and the R92, the AEA R92. So ended up not needing to use all of that. And I also didn't need all of the spot mics on our drums. I mean, there were several songs where Laura didn't play any of the like low tom. So there was no need for me to have the spot mic on that in the track. So anyways, after like doing that and just kind of doing a general sweep, I came up with this little bit of audio. Just give you a close. I don't have a mom. Okay, so it's like really muddy sounding, and it's definitely not ready, but I had somewhere to start. And so a lot of the challenges that I ran into on all of these songs were mostly the bass acts a lot like a guitar. Crystal plays high on the register for the bass, and there's even a bass solo in Coming Out specifically. That's the song I'm going to focus in on for you guys. And the guitar acts a lot like a bass, like the guitar is laying the foundation and the bass is what's actually giving like a lot of flavor. So they were occupying a lot of the same frequencies. So I tried like a combination of like panning them and EQing to help them both fit, but also still sound the way that they were intended. That's just one of the several challenges. So then next, I went through and worked on compression and gating the drums in particular. Any of the spot mics that I had were just trying to give them room. Using the spot mics to kind of thicken up the sound of the drums. So I kind of faced a little bit of a challenge with the Glenn John setup in that it didn't really isolate anything necessarily. It was kind of like the whole kit, just a different general sound of it. So compressing the kick wasn't necessarily just compressing the kick. It was also compressing like cymbals or the hi-hat. So that was a bit of a challenge. But I found some cheats to get through that. Gating on the spot mics was one of them, so that if I wanted to, I ended up compressing those a lot more. And then I found certain patterns that worked really well in one song that carried over and worked really well in another. So like using the, it was like the Abbey Roads emulator for the Red 17 console. It sounded awesome when I put it on Crystal's vocals. So I did it in almost all of the tracks on this EP because I wanted the sound to be consistent. And the same thing with the guitar and the bass, because they switched roles a lot. I used the same types of compressors on the guitar every time and EQ'd out like the same frequency ranges every time. So it kind of got quicker as I went along. So this was kind of what the next process sounded like.
I don't have a mom, she's not dead. She thinks I'm broken. I don't have a dad, he's not dead. He thinks I'm broken. I don't wanna care, but I do.
So it doesn't sound quite as muddy as the previous one. And that's thanks a lot to mostly to the EQ. I did a lot of EQing in this. So one of the second to last step for me was just trying to get back some frequencies that were lost in the recording process. I guess honing in on probably the really the bass in particular was one that I worked on a lot because she was playing in such a unique way. I ended up having to throw out the DI track that I had because it just sounded too clicky the way that she plays. So because I threw out the DI track, I kind of was stuck with just the amp sound. And that was a little bit limiting in that the way that the settings we had on the amp didn't have a lot of higher frequencies in the mix. So I went back and used distortion and some saturation to try to fill back in some higher frequencies, and then gave some boosts in the I think it was in like about in the 1K range, like 900 hertz ish, to get that picking sound back into the mix. So it's just an example. And after getting through this process, this is kind of the sound I was working with.
I don't have a mom, she's not dead. She thinks I'm broken. I don't have a dad, he's not dead. He thinks I'm broken. I don't wanna care, but I do. I don't wanna care, but I do.
Okay, so the last step for me was getting all of the delays and reverbs kind of fine-tuned. Because you could probably hear on that last recording, I had some delay and reverb already in there, but it wasn't quite adjusted yet. And I also, as kind of like a precursor to the mastering process, I went ahead and put a room verb in to kind of make it sound like everything was existing in the same space. So I used the same room reverb, which was actually an Abbey Roads Chambers plugin that I used. And I used the same one for every track and just varied how much of each individual track was being sent to it to kind of create a more realistic sound. So this is what I ended up with, kind of like the final pre-mastering mix.
I don't have a mom, she's not dead. She thinks I'm broken. I don't have a dad, he's not dead. He thinks I'm broken. I don't wanna care, but I do. I don't wanna care, but I do. I've got news for you. I'm not broken. I'm not broken. I'm not broken.
So the mastering process was actually pretty quick for these. I am not gonna lie, because the genre is punk or punk adjacent. Having things be a little rough around the edges is kind of a good thing. The priority is not to sound clean and beautiful and refined. It's really more about having an impact. So once we got the mix where everybody in the band was kind of like, yes, or only this, and like I made the last minute tweaks, I didn't want to change the way that mix sounded. So I discussed this with Dr. Fischer and Dr. White and kind of reached the decision that like really the mastering priority is going to be to get levels up and have it be like the correct level for the formats that they want to release them to. So streaming and then CD. So I put it through the Ozone Isotope Elements plugin and just worked on getting the average volume over time to be the right, like ideal settings. And then just threw in dither at the end to allow it to be able to just digitally convert to whatever format we're having to convert to. So really it was just compression and limiting and a tiny bit of EQ over the final overall mix to get the final track, which was, I'll play the same segment here.
I don't have a mom, she's not dead. She thinks I'm broken. I don't have a dad, he's not dead. He thinks I'm broken. I don't wanna care, but I do. I don't wanna care, but I do. I've got news for you. I'm not broken. I'm not broken. I'm not broken. I'm coming out. Maybe not. You should run and hide. They'll come around. Then I wreck shriveled up inside. I'm coming out. Maybe not. You should run and hide. They'll come around. Then I wreck shriveled up inside.
So yeah, that's it. So yeah, I guess I want to throw in there just an all around, again, thanks to Richard for letting me journey through this process with them and having patience of me being like daily around midnight, sending out a text to Crystal, saying that I uploaded the new demo for you to listen to. But yeah, I mean, it's not, it wasn't like a hyper super technical music theory kind of project, but there was a lot of learning for like what the process should be for me. It was really all about the process and just learning as I went along. So yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Great job, Evie. A few comments have come through here that I want to pass along to you. So first off, Esther Davidson, Evie, how exactly did you get so awesome? That might be a longer answer than we have time for, but
That's my sister. I'm so sorry. She warned me she was going to say that.
But she did ask what seems like also a good legitimate follow-up question. Do you plan on continuing to record bands, or will you focus more on recording live at the theater?
Honestly, probably neither. I might do, I mean, I have a home studio set up out of necessity for this program.
Is that what we're looking at behind you there?
Yeah, this used to just be like my guest room. I turned it into the studio. So my roommate and I, we like jam sometimes, but he's a singer-songwriter, and I've really enjoyed like learning a ton about recording, especially in small spaces like this teeny tiny room with him. So I'll probably continue to do that, and maybe continue doing that for like other people I know that are super small and have never been recorded before. But really what I want to do is teach audio. I am kind of starting that process actually right now at my current job. I'm going to have an intern for the first time in the fall. And my bosses and I have talked about using our downtime to talk to CFC students about live audio, because nobody at the college really does that right now. So it's kind of a little bit of a drought in our area as far as people willing to talk about it and teach it who have the time.
Well, you'd be a great person to do that for sure. We do have on that note too, Dr. White has said, you have a bright future as an engineer, but your ability to communicate, adapt, and bring out the best in your collaborators has also made you a fantastic producer. Which is very nice.
Thank you.
Yeah. And we've got it looks like some people from the band here are also commenting about the process and everything. So we'll make sure that you get a chance to look at that.
Cool.
But yeah, fantastic job. Really nice. It's so fun to, I mean, we've had just a blast this semester listening to those songs as you've been going through that evolution. And I know Kyle, McKinley, and I have said, even when you have to like run off to work, we're all talking about another topic. And then we're like, do you have coming out in your head right now? Like, I'm just singing constantly coming out. So great job, Richard, on writing something that's really deep emotionally, but also very catchy and super fun to pump your fist out to. So yeah, cool. Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else that you want to add before we move on to our last presenter?
Nothing really. I guess just throwing out there, I'm not going to be all like super mushy really, but I don't think I could have gotten through this process without you three kind of being encouraging and giving me advice. And it's been really stressful, but I'm very thankful. So yeah, thanks guys.
Well, you did an excellent job. And of course, working a full-time job while being a student is not an easy task. So
no. I suppose I should throw out there, like, thank you, my bosses at the Satilli Theater, for letting me use my comp time and vacation time to leave in the middle of the day to go to my virtual class. They were very patient and super accommodating too.
awesome.
So yeah, a lot of horrible things have come out because of the pandemic, but I actually was very fortunate in that I was able to do everything virtually and stay in Charleston and keep my job while also being able to do this program. So
Well, you did a great job.
It worked out for me.
Yeah. Nice job. And thank you, Richard, also for being the test subjects for this project. The band sounds great. The songs sound great. And when is the EP going to be released?
So the plan is to release sometime at the end of the month.
Awesome.
But there's not a concrete date, thank goodness. Because we'll probably do some more tweaking as the month goes on to just finalize it all. And then of course, the process of actually releasing takes time. But if you want to know more, they're on Facebook. Just if you search Richard Their page is the first one that pops up. And they're also
Oh, they
on
have Richard.
Instagram.
That's a pretty good get.
Yeah, it's all caps.
We'll ask the band also to maybe post a link in the message here too. That would
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Go follow them. They'll keep you up on
Awesome.
when this is going to come out.
Excellent. Well, great. Thank you so much, Evie.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, and for our last student presenter, we have Kyle Strain. Last but definitely not least, Kyle. None of us are least. You guys just crushed it here. So Kyle, I'm going to give you a little intro and then I'm going to let you take it away. So Kyle grew up in Western Pennsylvania and studied saxophone performance at Slippery Rock University. He is active as a saxophonist in the area and spends his summers working as a member of the stage crew at the Marlborough Music Festival, a classical music retreat located in the mountains of southern Vermont. Kyle wrote, arranged, recorded, mixed, and mastered the 5-song EP, Crowd Got My Tongue. Kyle, would you like to tell us about this project?
Sure. So let me share my screen.
Please.
Okay. I am unmuted.
Stop. It isn't safe out there. The air is rife with little waves that worm their way inside. So don your tinfoil hat. Look out.
Cool. Okay, that was about 38 seconds of Hold Up, which was one of the songs that I recorded as part of my Capstone project. So to get into it, the goal of my Capstone project was, as mentioned earlier, to write, record, mix, and master an EP of I don't know, I skipped that slide for some reason. Mix and master an EP called Crowd Got My Tongue. Came up with that name earlier today. Consists of 5 songs. Hold Up, which is what you just heard, just let's say a funk tune. Breakthrough, which is a 70s-esque rockish kind of soft rock, I would say, in the vein of Steely Dan. Golden One, which is a ballad. Reunion, which is synthesizer driven kind of down tempo thing, which is, I'll get into it later, but it's kind of a weird way to describe it. But and then to close out, Hippotron, which is an instrumental track. I'm not singing on it. It's kind of a fusion-y thing. And actually that track is what I'm going to go into in depth later on. So I separated my project into 3 stages. And these are the 3 stages that you generally run into when you're working on a song or an album or an EP or something. So the first stage is pre-production, which consists of writing songs and arranging already written music for live band. In my case, 3 of the 5 tracks I already had in some form or another. I had released a thing earlier that had some of the same songs, but in just an electronic format. And then 2 of the songs I wrote from scratch. The second stage is recording, which consists of coordinating with local musicians, scheduling recording sessions at the Wheelwright Studio, which is a studio that we have on campus at Coastal Carolina University. There were a handful of social distancing considerations, which, I obeyed to the best of my ability. McKinley went into detail about it in his presentation, so I don't feel the need to do it in mine. And also, a lot of recording was done outside the studio, either at my apartment, at someone else's apartment, or in a couple cases, things were flown in remotely. The third stage is post-production, which consisted of compiling, editing, mixing, and mastering the songs that I recorded previously. And that took up the bulk of my time this semester. And as I mentioned earlier, Hippotron will be the example song that I'll get into later on. Cool. So here are, I don't know why I keep skipping slides. Okay, so basically the first thing that I was doing this semester was, after I decided what I wanted to do this semester in terms of the Capstone project, I wanted to write lyrics and sing on most of the songs here. And I had never written lyrics before. So this was really kind of a challenge for me. I had a hard time coming up with what to write about, basically, but I found success, thinking in retrospect, keeping the message simple, because I went through, I don't know, 2 or 3 drafts of each song before I came up with the final thing. And I was going through all sorts of different messages and ideas and narratives, and eventually I had to say, okay, stop, just write something simple and keep it to one idea per song. So that's what I did, basically. And so a lot of them cover personal topics and a few more tongue-in-cheek ones. Like Golden One, the ballad song, is about my struggles with anxiety through the years. Reunion is about this like mortality thing. I don't mean to get too deep, but and then Hold Up is the tongue-in-cheek song. It's about fear of alien surveillance, which for some people is a legitimate fear, but for me it's more like, oh, that's kind of funny. Yeah, and so my biggest lesson here is just not overthink it. Like I wrote Hold Up in one day because I was just out of ideas, and I was like, okay, so aliens, and they're kind of watching you, so I kind of went with that. Cool. So here are a couple scans I made of my composition notebook. You can see on the left here is the Golden One lyrics. The working title was In the Morning, actually, because that's the first line. And on the right, there's Breakthrough, which was originally Breakthrough number 2. I see I wrote For Real here, which is actually the 3rd draft of the song. I kept rewriting it because I couldn't decide on what I wanted to say. Whoops. Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, in pre-production, the total goal was to prepare 5 songs for recording. And so to accomplish that, I had this plan, and I went through with it eventually, to bring in live musicians from the area, mainly from the Family Function Band, which McKinley is a part of. And so in order to get them the right idea of what I wanted them to play, I had to produce demos. And so in the pre-production stage, I was taking a lot of the arrangements of what I already had and adapting it for live musicians to listen to, figure out their parts, and then, you know, play along to potentially. So each musician in this process got 2 demos. I got one with the track and one without the track that they were going to copy, basically. Excuse me. One of the big things that I was thinking about, like considerations in mind for this step, was that I wanted to capture the musicians' personal styles, and I didn't want to say, okay, here is a part, I want you to play this part, I want to play these notes in this order. And so because of that, I didn't write much sheet music out. I did some for myself for some horn parts later on, but for sending out demos, I didn't worry about that. I was just like, okay, here's some lyrics, here's some chords, and here's a demo. Come up with something, because I know that you can. Oh, and then pictured is the guitar and bass I used in demo production. So multiple revisions of the demos were made through, combined pre-production recording phases. Everything kind of bled into one eventually, but it was just kind of like pre-production, a bunch of stuff, recording a bunch of stuff, and then post-production. Something that I wasn't anticipating from the beginning was that the demos were slowly becoming the final tracks, as in, as I was making more and more demos for people through different stages of the recording process, they were changing over time, becoming less my stuff and more their stuff. And yeah, as they were recorded or flown in, my stuff was replaced. And an interesting consequence of that is that the end result of the recorded project is way different from what I originally anticipated. I don't think it's due to me losing perspective on what I wanted, but I'm actually very happy with what happened. Actually, the Hippotron example that I'll get into later is like the largest one for that. It changed the most, I think. Yeah, almost all the musicians were local to the Myrtle Beach area, so scheduling wasn't an issue. Everyone was within, I would say, at most 30, 40 minutes away. And so again, I spent most of the time assembling various demos. And then I think there was one time when everyone gathered. Four of the 5 tunes were compiled piecemeal due to social distancing restrictions. Hold Up is the only live song that we recorded. That's the one, again, that you heard at the beginning of the presentation. For that, I followed just about the same format as McKinley's large family function recording. Other than that, pretty much 1 to 2 players would come in at a time over the course of a month, and I would make sure they were far apart. Separated by gobos or little acrylic panels or, whatever, just to keep people apart, and at first, in planning the recordings for this, I was really set on getting the core of each song done at the same time, as in the bass player and the drummer, or, bass player, drummer, guitarist, or bass player, drummer, keyboard player, whatever it may be for that particular song. That didn't actually work out just due to people's schedules, because McKinley was the bass player on all of my tracks, and he was doing his own Capstone. So, naturally, we had to make some compromises. So basically what happened was I would record each part separately, and then I spent a little bit of time trying to keep the intent there, but in editing, moving stuff around and making sure that it sounds like it was recorded in the same space. And I have this note down here, riding the line between intent and over editing in post-production. So I didn't want to turn this into a polished, overproduced pop song. I was trying to keep it sounding loose and live and realistic. So now it comes to the recording phase. It consisted of 4 main sessions. And I'm not going to read those through. I mean, you can read them yourself. But this full band family function session, that was the one where everyone was in there together. The largest hurdles for this, I think, the first one on it was being the producer, engineer, and writer all at once. And so for the smaller sessions where it was 1 person or 2 people in the room, it wasn't that big of a deal. I don't think. I wasn't really stressing about it because they could play their part. I'd stop them if I needed to. I'd say, okay, here, put this note here, adjust this, here, build up at this section, come down. And it was fine. But in the session where it was the full band on April 8th, I was kind of getting a little bit frazzled. And I think it came out okay. And that was due in large part to the fact that I'm familiar and have a good working relationship with the people in the band. And honestly, just due to their musicianship, I didn't have to micromanage as much as I thought I might need to. And then the other hurdle was just making the best of piecemeal recording with multiple demos. But again, I've said that. So here are 4 pictures from the first drum recording that took place. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but something I did a little bit differently was over on the right here. These are the overhead mics. I have an XY coincident pair up top, which is fairly standard for drum recording. It's one of a few options. But then in addition to that, I've managed to jerry-rig together a Cascade Fathead, which is actually one of my personal mics, again, as a mono overhead, just in case. I actually ended up using it. I made some adjustments in post for phase, and I thought it sounded pretty cool. In addition, there's an under snare mic here, which captures a lot of the direct snare sound, which I blended in underneath the top snare mic. Again, the musicians I worked with are very detail oriented. Because of this, and because, again, of my relationship with them, it allowed me to get multiple passes without player frustration, too much player frustration, I should say. We took a few breaks. So I ended up with a ton of material, like 5 or 6 or 7 takes per tune per part. And so it gave me a ton of flexibility to move stuff around, to bring maybe this note or this bar from take 2 up to take 5 and use this like compilation of takes. I really appreciated having all that material because I like to get kind of surgical with edits and stuff. And then a lot of the final recordings of the vocals and horns were done at home. I don't think I recorded any of my horn parts in the studio, just the way it worked out. And I also I actually had a session with McKinley where he was engineering for me. I recorded all my vocals in the studio and then ended up scrapping it because, and this is something I probably should have realized going into it, but I am not the best singer. And so my endurance is very low. And about a third of the way through the session, my voice was blowing out. And so I went on anyway. I was like, okay, I got to get this done. But it was bad. And this is coming from me about my own singing. But the engineering was fine. Anyway, I ended up recording at home with the T12, which is over here, which actually I built last semester as part of the requirements for a tech skills class, I think. Anyway, it had to do with, components and building a microphone or a preamp or something. I really like it. The capsule inside is based on the C12 capsule design, which is a very iconic capsule design from the past. Whoops. And it's sonically similar to the C414, which is a much more expensive microphone. So I appreciate that. I think it's a great multi-purpose mic. Anyway, I recorded pretty much all my stuff on it. Cool. Okay, so with the second drum recording, for this, I did something a little bit different. I set up the drum set, and the pictures are on the next slide, but I was aware of older ways to get a good reverb sound before we had hardware and software plugins to get reverb, like little boxes or rack units or anything like that. And so this is actually a picture of the Abbey Road reverb chamber with these pillars that you can move around, and moving the pillars changes the character of the reverb. But basically what it is a speaker right here piping sound into a room and then being recorded in that room. So, excuse me, on this slide, you can see here is the drum set, and then the snare and the two overhead mics I piped into the bathroom in Wheelwright. And so this speaker right here is pointed at the corner, and then around this corner is a microphone set to omnidirectional, which means it picks up sound from all directions equally. And so then I brought that in, and I have it placed in parallel with the dry snare sound. And I do not have an audio example of that, but I ended up using that in conjunction with some software reverb. So it's not entirely authentic, but I thought it was still worth including in the final product. Oh, and then you see these cables just running all the way from the studio around the corner, all the way into the bathroom. So cool. So on to the mixing phase. Much of the mixing phase bled into recording, or I should say recording bled into mixing. Because it wasn't as cookie cutter, clean cut, end of recording phase, beginning of mix phase for me. I ended up going back and redoing stuff and being, okay, you gotta come back in, record something again. But I think realistically, that's just kind of how it works out most of the time. Much of the time I spent recording, it was re-recording vocals and horn lines, like I mentioned earlier. And then when it came to just mixing stuff down, my main reference for the mixes was Steely Dan's Asia album, which was mixed by Elliot Shiner. And actually, I think the song that not to say that I got really close to it in any regard, but the model, I think Hold Up, the one you heard at the beginning, came the closest of any of the ones that I got. Just in terms of that, like separation of sounds and just very open, clean sounding mix. The other one that I really kind of drew from was a song Dirge by the band Survive. And they're notable for writing the Stranger Things soundtrack. It's a duo. It's two guys that do it. And they use a lot of analog synthesizers. And it was the inspiration for my song Reunion, which is a down-tempo song with this like wall of sound synthesizer thing happening in the background. So my EP was mixed entirely at home. I didn't actually utilize the studio for mixing, although I had the option to. It was done on headphones and these monitors right here. I made extensive use of vintage hardware emulator plugins, including the LA2A leveling amplifier, the 1176 FET compressor, and the Pultec EQP1 tube equalizer, which is an interesting one to say the least. Oh, and I use a couple tape saturators, tape saturators as well, which just impart a tape, like reel-to-reel tape sound, that kind of distortion. This was all done to impart a character similar to vintage recordings. And I also made pretty much equal use of Ableton Live and Pro Tools, which are two DAWs or digital audio workstations. that I had at my disposal. Basically, I use Live for part writing and Pro Tools for mixing. So if I needed to come up with a new thing, I'd go to Ableton and do it, and then bring it over to Pro Tools and mix it. I use Live a lot for the demos as well, because I just think it's a little friendlier for note input and that kind of thing. So I became proficient at, quickly moving between DAWs. In a single session, I'd be back and forth 3 or 4 times. So I also did a couple recordings after recording, aside from the vocal and horn stuff, where I made use of the Moog Subsequent 37 that we have in the studio. And it is a analog synthesizer. And I also added some software synthesizer parts, mainly for just fleshing out arrangements. I had the stuff that the live musicians did, and then I would add stuff to kind of fill out the sound. The overall goal was to have a marriage of traditional and synthesized textures, to put it formally. I used, the 37 for the bass lines in Reunion and Hippotron. And again, I'll show you the soloed bass line in Hippotron later. In order to do that, I ran MIDI out through Ableton Live through my interface into the Subsequent 37 and then back out audio into Ableton Live. I also use string samples in the B section of Hippotron. And those were just the stock Ableton Live strings pack with the suite, blended with 3 sax parts. Whoops, I keep skipping slides. So in the mastering phase, it ended up being the shortest stage of my project. Really, there are a few considerations to keep in mind with this. I wanted to keep the sonic character between songs in the EP roughly consistent. I didn't mess with fade ins or fade outs until mastering. I did that in the mastering phase. And I brought the level of each track up to a standard volume for streaming. And I prepped each track for flexibility in multiple formats. In this case, it was just dither to make sure that when you downsample and downsample tracks, that it works out and that you don't come up with any aliasing artifacts. Here are a couple screenshots from that. I know they're really small, but you can see I have all 5 tracks lined up and I have plugins running down each one. And basically I would bounce it in turn, and those would be the masters. So now in depth on Hippotron. Basically, it is the final track on Crowd Got My Tongue, the EP. It's the only instrumental track. And notably, it's the first piece I actually ever wrote at CCU. And that's not why I picked it, but I was bored in the Mac lab one day while tutoring. No one was in. And so I just, jotted it down. And from there, expanded it. But I thought it would be a good instrumental adaptation because it's a fairly simple song. Anyway, so the EP version, based on an earlier version I'd released as part of my Tunes for the Old Branch Line EP from last spring. So I'll play a little bit, not the whole 125, but I'll play a little bit of the old version so you can compare to the new version. So yeah, that was the old version, and here's the new version. So as you can hear, there's a lot more going on in the new version, and that's all just layering with horns and flute and the Moog and all this stuff. But yeah, the new version retains the roots of the old. The framework's the same, but there's sax, Subsequent 37, strings, and flute. The strings are not real, the flute is. So production of the demo is actually very easy for the song because I already had it written. The only real thing I changed was I modified the arrangement a little bit, like the large form of the piece. I would shorten, I think the middle section I shortened quite a bit, and then I just duplicated sections at the beginning and the end. And so I didn't really write anything new before I sent it off to Wade to check it out and record. but I just kind of evened out the arrangement so it like flowed better. I also added the tenor and flute parts before I sent it off to him, and I replaced that weird, really loud drum part with an acoustic kit that just sounded kind of normal. Whoops. Yeah, so additional adjustments were made. Yeah, so with the subsequent 37 in Hippotron, basically, we learned about analog synthesizers last fall, I believe, and we covered that. And so that got me interested in messing with analog synths. I think it's really fun to play with, and it's also a great tool for laying down bass lines, especially the subsequent 37. So I'm going to show you the 2 parts in Hippotron that have Moog patches on them. So this is the isolated bass patch controlled by MIDI. And you hear that change in the sound as it goes on. I'm actually holding the frequency knob and opening it up and closing it as the song progresses. And then here's the one of the lead sounds earlier in the song. I actually played it by hand because I didn't have the MIDI on hand. And for that, I just want to make sure that you hear the noise component of the lead. That's one of the oscillators. It's a noise oscillator. And I like to include that in patches because it kind of gives this like breathy quality that makes it sound, to my ears, kind of like a wind instrument. Not convincingly so, but closer than without. So here, recording Hippotron in the studio. First off, I want to apologize for the weird picture of this, but I actually took the picture while sitting down, so the camera was at an awkward angle, so I had to rotate it. But the drums and auxiliary percussion were provided by Wade McMillan. Everything else in this song I actually created myself or recorded at home. We spent about 2 hours working out his part before we actually started recording at all. We were just talking about the different sections and transitions, and I want you to play this pattern here and then bring it up and transition to this here and then drop out here, you know, that kind of stuff. Excuse me. Then we finished recording with 4 good takes. I largely used the final take, and I think I brought in maybe a bar or 2, excuse me, from previous takes just because there were like little hiccups here or there. And then in addition to that, there's an auxiliary percussion track. Well, actually, there are 4 composed of 2 shaker tracks, a metal scraper track, and a go-go bells track. The metal scraper I was asking him to kind of make it sound like a Wiro a little bit, but it's the same idea, but it's very metallic and bright instead of being like a dark woody tone. So again, mixing with this began very early on due to the fact that I already had a lot of stuff done. It was just a matter of bouncing it out of Ableton Live and importing it into Pro Tools to begin, doing some like proper processing on it. The Ableton arrangement had a lot of stuff printed, and so I had to redo some parts in order to get dry tracks over. Again, to serve the arrangement, I tried to create a wall of sound effect in the second half, and this is something that was missing from the first version of this song. And that was something, after I released that EP last year, I was listening and I'm like, man, I just think there needs to be something more. And so I feel like I got closer to that. I never want to say it's perfect, but that's why I included it in this second EP. And then, I actually added flute like last to fill out the sound and played little small solos here and there. So here is actually the sax, flute, and string part soloed to give you an idea of the wall of sound effect. So you get an idea. It's meant to just kind of be this orchestral, huge sounding thing. The other main focus when I was mixing this was focusing on just the drum kit balance and blend. And I wanted to sound very dry and tight while simultaneously having this reverb component only on the snare. And so what I did was I used what's called a gated snare or gated reverb snare. I actually wrote that backwards. It's popularized in the 80s, actually, with Coming in the Air Tonight, Phil Collins. That like massive snare on the backbeat is entirely this processing technique. And so what it consists of, to get technical for a second, is you take your snare track, you duplicate it so that you have it sending to another track. And then on that track, you place reverb and then compress the reverb and then have a gate after those two effects that's triggered by the dry snare. And you can tune the gate correctly so that it only opens when the snare hits. And so you can actually tune how long the gate's open and how long the reverb happens within that gate and within that time when the gate's open. So anyway, here are the drums without the gated snare. And I want you to listen specifically to the snare sound. And now with the gated snare, the snare will sound a little bit bigger. So I know that that's not like as huge as like Phil Collins's thing in Coming in the Air Tonight, but I don't know. I thought it added to the vibe of the track. Cool. So with mastering Hippotron, again, this is kind of just the same as what I mentioned earlier with mastering. I just want to bring up the levels to a standard volume for streaming. I think that's minus 14.8 LUFS. Again, another technical term. On this in particular, I blew up this track so you could see what I have running on the master track. And it's just some light compression. Well, there's a slight EQing. Then light compression, a slight boost to the high end with the Vitamin Saturator plugin. And actually that's a neat plugin because it adds new information instead of just boosting what's already there. So it's a little bit different from an EQ, but I think the end result is similar in this case. And then Dither to help with downsampling again for eventually changing to other audio formats. So here I'll just play a brief section of the unmastered and the mastered. Whoops. The main thing you're going to hear is just a volume difference. And then mastered. It's also very compressed, but again, that's kind of the vibe I was going for with this one. Cool. So with that, I just want to move on to the acknowledgements. So I want to thank my professors, especially Dr. White, Dr. Fischer. I want to thank Evie and McKinley, who helped me immensely throughout the recording, the whole project, and also my family and the band that recorded, you know. So cool. That's it.
Awesome. Thank you, Kyle. How about this? Before we wrap up here, do you mind going back a slide and we can listen to a little bit of this track, the mastered version? How long is that sample?
7 seconds.
Oh, well, that might be what we just heard. I just wanted to get a little bit more of it because I enjoyed this one so much.
I can, if you want me to, I can flip over to the master and just play that.
Yeah, let's maybe just get like 20, 30 seconds of it. It sounds so good.
Cool.
If you feel comfortable doing this.
Oh, yeah. Just got to find it.
Cool. And then if anybody has any questions for Kyle, you can please post them.
Oh, there it is.
So you can see how organized all of the students are, keeping track of all these different files and different versions and demos and whatnot.
Cool. So here's a little bit of the full track. You want me to jump forward a bit, or?
Yeah, give us like 20 more seconds when the wall of sound hits. How about that?
Yeah. Okay. Let me.
We're going to see if. There you go. Yeah, man. That deep moog bass.
Oh yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Well, yeah, everybody just is digging on your guys' sound, so there's no questions for you, Kyle. Except I got one. When is the EP dropping?
I don't have a date set yet, but I do intend to release it on Lanterns or CD Baby. I'm actually still working that out, but soon. I'd say within the month.
Cool. And so how can people follow you and find when this comes out? Will you be releasing under your name, Kyle Strain, or do you have an artist name?
Yeah, so I mean, it'll be Kyle Strain, basically. My SoundCloud profile is Kyle Actual, which is an old Battlestar Galactica reference for those that are hip to it. I don't think anyone is, but yeah, no, Kyle Actual on SoundCloud. And then I think if I get it on Spotify or Apple Music, I'll have it on just my name. So
awesome. Well, great. Yeah, nice job, Kyle.
Cool.
So I think you guys did it. You finished your presentations. All the music's been mastered, so you'll be submitting that to the faculty panel. You know, tomorrow we'll talk about it, but in the meantime, just pat yourself on the back for a job well done. And I want to thank you, all three of you, for just being great students and for working hard and contributing so much to the culture of the music department at Coastal. All three of you have participated in teaching classes or running live sound or recording our student ensembles for the undergrad or all of the above. So thank you so much, because not only were you students here, but you were contributing to the culture and the vibe of our department and making it better. So I just want to make sure that you all know that. Yeah, I also want to take a minute and thank all the amazing faculty for the MTM program here for doing a great job of supporting you guys and giving you good information so you can produce this great work. And I want to thank our administration, Dr. Jones, our department chair, Dr. Bornholt, our Dean of the College of Humanities and Fine Arts, and Dr. Amanda Bryan, who has been helping us with our grad program as we continue to grow. And so thank you all. Yeah, congratulations. And remember, you've got final projects for me on Wednesday morning. That's all I got. You did it. Cool. I say let's have a night, huh?
Thanks, Dr. Fischer.
Of course.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you everybody for listening, for contributing to this, and we'll see you again next year, same time, same place, but hopefully in person. So we'll do it then. All right, everybody.